Hey guys, welcome to Sealess Social Studies. Today we are going to be reviewing some of the causes of the American Revolutionary War. What happened that caused this whole revolution, the colonists to grow up and rebel and all this other stuff. So here's a start, okay? The beginning of this whole revolution is starting at the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763. What you have to remember is the king and parliament over in Britain was trying to figure out a way to, I need to pay off this war, this French and Indian War that we just fought to save the colonists over in America, those British subjects over there in the colonies. How are we going to pay for it? I got it. Let's tax them. Okay. The British Parliament and the king, the monarch, decided that they would impose a series of acts or taxes among the or on top of the British subjects in North America in the 13 colonies. Would this anger them? Heck yeah, it did, because there's a couple of things you have to remember. Number one, you're talking about generations now. The British came over here in 1607 and established Jamestown. Well, now we're talking the late 1700s. So now you're generational. People who were born here now feel like they are from the colonies, that they should be separate from that little old island, England, and their king. Another thing is that we've established colony governments. So we think that we should be faithful to our governments, not necessarily the king of Britain or the British Parliament. So the king and parliament decide to put taxes on the 13 colonies. To pay off these debts, these acts or taxes really made these colonists mad. How did it make them mad? Well, they protested pretty much after each time the king passed an act or parliament passed an act. One reason why they were so upset, besides the whole generational thing and having new types of governments and the Enlightenment period of John Locke, you're talking now about taxation without representation. What's taxation without representation? That was their big motto, the colonists' big motto. No taxation without representation. They were really feeling kind of backstabbed because they didn't have any representation, no colonist representation in British Parliament to argue against these taxes. All right, so let's start getting into some of these taxes and acts that the king put on the colonists. The first one, is a Proclamation of 1763. That was the one that told colonists that they were not allowed to move west of the Appalachian Mountains, hindering the expansion of the colonists who wanted to grow their tobacco plantations and make a lot more money. In 1764, the king passes the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act is an act that actually cuts the sugar tax by about 50%. However, the British Parliament is now going to be much more diligent in taking this tax, this sugar tax, okay? So it wasn't just on sugar, it was on things like wine and molasses as well, but this started the ball rolling of colonists getting mad at the king about these taxes. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Stamp Act of 1765. This Stamp Act was basically an act that stated this: anything that was produced in Britain and sold in the 13 colonies that was made of paper had this revenue stamp. So playing cards, bags, paper bags, if you had newspapers, any type of pamphlets or anything like that, had this stamp on it. You had to pay this revenue to the British king or parliament in order to own, or whenever you purchase, any type of paper products. So in 1765, the Quartering Act is passed, and that basically says even if your home is already full of people, if the British Army needs a place to eat or sleep, tough luck, get out. They're going to go ahead and live in your home, and you're going to feed them with your food and let them sleep in your bed. Colonists like it? No, of course not. Another protest, right? They start protesting all the time. 1767, the Townsend Acts. The Townsend Acts were a series of acts that were placed on things that would really affect the wealthy. Why the wealthy? Because the king felt it was going to be these wealthy that were going to be the big troublemakers. So what type of things does the king place his tax on in the Townsend Acts? You're looking at paper, lead, tea, paint, glass, things like that you see in everyday houses. Now, how would the king make sure that this tax would go on? He would use these things called the writs of assistance. It's kind of like a search warrant. They would literally go into your house and they would just start seeing what you had that needed to be taxed. So the British tax collectors would go in, they would go into the houses. We need a tax on that. We need a tax on that. We need a tax on that. You need a tax on that. And ultimately what would happen is danger for these tax collectors, things like tarring and feathering, which then, of course, made the king mad. It was kind of like, you put a tax on us, we're going to fight back. You're going to get mad, put another tax on us. We're going to fight back again. And after the Townsend Acts, the colonists began to boycott British goods or stop buying British goods. In response to this, the king starts sending troops over to North America, over to the 13 colonies. And this will lead up into small type skirmish things, like in March 1770, we have the Boston Massacre. You have a group of colonists who are now getting upset. They're starting to riot in the streets, and you have about 9 British soldiers who are standing there fully armed against a crowd of colonists who have nothing but shells and, snowballs, little stuff like this that they're able to throw at these guards. One of these British soldiers gets hit, fires a couple of shots. Next thing you know, the whole British group right there of 9-10 soldiers are firing on this crowd, which is why it's called a massacre, because you have the loaded British, they have their firearms against the crowd that is not armed, and killing 5. So there's 5 people killed in this massacre, including Crispus Attucks. He was a mixed apprentice and really one of the first people to die in this Revolutionary War. The Townsend Acts are eventually repealed later in 1770. Then you have the Tea Act in 1773. The Tea Act basically gave the British East India Tea Company a monopoly on the tea trade in North America. Why does this make people upset? The tea is cheaper, but if you're talking about, like, let's say you like sweet tea, right? Let's say you like Bojangles sweet tea. They're trying to pass off Walmart sweet tea as your Bojangles sweet tea. So the colonists are getting mad. They're getting less quality tea, even though it's cheaper. They don't like it. So how do we respond to this Tea Act? Well, I'm sure everybody's heard of the Boston Tea Party. In 1773, the Sons of Liberty, a group of patriots who would go ahead and protest the monarchy and the Tea Act, they get dressed up as Native Americans. They go into a boat and they toss all the tea into the Boston Harbor, which then, in response to that, the king forces the Intolerable Acts, or the Coercive Acts, on Massachusetts in 1774. The Intolerable Acts, or the Coercive Acts, were a mixture of acts to go against Massachusetts and really try to divide the 13 colonies. They took away the British leadership and put them direct control under the monarch. They closed the harbors in Boston. They took all the leaders from Boston, shipped them back to England, and put them over in court. They canceled the charter of Massachusetts. So the Intolerable Acts was really the king trying to separate the 13 colonies, in the fact of really hammering down on Massachusetts to try to see if they can just strike fear into the rest of the 13 colonies. So those acts right there that we've gone over, the Stamp Act, Sugar Act, Tea Act, the Boston Massacre, Intolerable Acts, the Coercive Acts, the Quartering Act, all these acts were just things that just built up and really were the main causes of the Revolutionary War.